Now, our keynote speaker this evening is a professor, Professor Michael Buxton. He's Professor of Environment and Planning at the School of Global, Urban and Social Studies at RMIT University. He's contributed for many years to government planning policy and research on urban planning, and has addressed more of these meetings than probably he would care to counter, but he's been very active in supporting communities with their struggles to maintain what they've got and to prevent the damage that can be done by even this single development. So please welcome Professor Michael Buxton.
Thank you, Rod.
Published a book this year.
He published a book this year called
Planning for Melbourne.
Planning for
I
Melbourne.
suppose academics are supposed to publish books, aren't they, if you don't? Some people are going to start thinking Rod and I are brothers because we keep turning up at meetings like this and putting our arms around each other in front of the camera. So it's good to be back here again, catching up again, Rod. And it's great to see so many people here tonight. As Chris said, this is not an unusual circumstance in Melbourne these days. Probably been to 20 meetings like this year, of sometimes up to 500 or 600 people or more, and worked with lots of other community groups that haven't gone to meetings, but they've been working away on their own applications. There's something really fundamental happening to Melbourne at the moment, and we know what it is. It's unrestricted development, which is completely changing the nature and function of this city in a very short space of time. And the planning rules and the planning system is simply not able to cope with that, and that's deliberate. Successive governments have put in place a planning system which is designed to facilitate development, and the whole object of this is to enable developers to go and identify land, find land that they can develop, and then they work out the rules, they work out the yield, they work out the type of development that goes on that site. So government's role becomes, in that case, simply to get as many rules off the table as possible so that developers can be as unimpeded as possible in going out and doing their job and hunting out these sites, like this one. And as Glenn said, the rules, there are no rules, but the developer's expectations change. So a permit for 5 stories is granted, the developer then sits on it. Either that developer or another developer comes along 5, 6, 7, 8 years later and triples the yield. Why not? There are no rules, give it a go. It's happening everywhere, from the CBD to Dandenong. So this is the system that you are trying to respond to, and there is an unending round of problems with this. So development site after development site can be traced back to an inadequate planning system, and the successive government's refusal to change it. So in this case, this is in a mixed-use zone, and the critical zones, as other speakers have said, this is the beginning. I mean, this is a really important issue, and good luck to you in winning this and fighting it. You've got a battle to fight on this particular site. But if you don't happen to live right close to this, don't worry. There'll be one coming close to you sometime soon. So don't feel left out, because they're already queuing up. International finance is now moving out of the CBD into our strip centres, right through Richmond, Fitzroy, Collingwood. Lots of money is going in land banking. Already Yarra's being subjected to a lot of these developments in the commercial zones and the mixed-use zone. The C1 zone, the commercial 1 zone and mixed-use zone they're the two most prone zones. This is in the mixed-use zone. And there, surprise, surprise, no height controls in these 2 zones. Now this is an invitation to developers to just come up with their own height they think they can get away with. And it just keeps going up. Now what this does is drive up the price of land, because you often have developers competing for the land. They have to then build higher developments, squeeze more on, smaller apartments and so on, in order to in order to get their 20 to 30%. That's what developers are getting out of these now. 20 to 30% of the total cost of the development is going. It's unprecedented in the returns. There are fortunes being made in Melbourne from this poor quality development because the rules simply do not exist. Now, I think it's ironic that the previous Liberal government, Mr. Matthew Guy, who wasn't, Matthew and I didn't kind of get on all that well, but it's ironic that he has brought in the only regulatory controls that have really affected the Melbourne, the planning system in the metropolitan area since the new system was brought in by Kennett, and they were the residential zones, particularly the general residential and the neighbourhood residential zones, where there are height controls. And there were quite strict controls on the neighbourhood residential zones, and some of you will live in that zone. Now, it's ironic that a very pro-development minister actually brought in the only development controls that are meaningful. Why are they meaningful? Because they have mandatory height controls. They have mandatory restrictions that can be measured. And what you've got now are no height controls, or sometimes there are in some councils structure plans or heritage overlays with really no quantified enforceable control. So the successive governments will not allow councils to bring in mandatory height controls in the commercial zone and the mixed-use zone. And the department is absolutely fundamental on this. They're like ideologues, they're like religious fanatics who hold a belief that cannot be shaken. Now, it's up to the government to stop this. Enough talk, enough platitudes, and enough hand-holding. It's time now that the government either said, we are going to look ahead 10, 20, 30, 50 years and stop this plethora of incremental knocking down of heritage buildings and inappropriate developments of sites by fixing this problem, and it can be fixed. So, in the couple of minutes I have left, these are the kind of suggestions that I think ought to be put to government. Again, they have been already, but I think a meeting like this is such a powerful tool because, as I said, there are many other meetings like this and thousands of other people like yourselves. Developers have the money, they have the influence, they have the lobby groups, and they have the message, and they stay on message, but they don't have the votes. And that's powerful in an election that is coming up within 2 years in a government with a government that is only narrowly in seats that must be held. Now that gives you an enormous amount of leverage if you want to use it. Right? Why would any government not listen to people like you in a seat like this? Right? Now, I think if you want to get something done on this site, then you have to put this to the government, that the government has to intervene. Now, the government can't, it's down the track, it's going to VCAT, the minister can call this in. Right? If the government's serious about trying to get a decent, reasonable outcome on this, then the planning minister has the power to call this in and make the determination. Right? Now, the minister acted very, very quickly when there was an authorised demolition of a hotel right, in Carlton, right? They got their skates on. Why? Because it became a huge issue. The whole of Melbourne was outraged. Well, you have the same kind of power in this seat. This is a marginal seat. Now, there's no reason why the minister need to step back and let this be fought out at massive cost with an indeterminate outcome. You might win, you might lose. And if you lose, you've got that. You're stuck with it forever. And it's a precedent then because it's going to be used for other developments. So that's on this site. I think it's very important that when you've got a good group, they go to the minister with a very clear statement or a very clear request. It's really a demand. It needs to be put in a courteous way in the form of a request, but basically there needs to be something solid produced by the government on this. Now, as for the longer term issues, you're going to be responding in North Fitzroy. There's development going up extraordinarily. You drive around these seats. The developer's message was, oh, this is a one-off site. It's the best site left in this area. Huh? You've only got to drive around to see what's happening to know that's false. So there need to be changes to the planning system. Mandatory height controls in the commercial zone and the mixed-use zone. The mixed-use zone is being plundered. Right? Go to Collingwood and look at the applications, in the mixed-use zone, and it is just going to be plundered. This is only the beginning. In the commercial one zone, we are going to lose all our wonderful, iconic strip shopping centres. They're going to be turned into facades. They already are being, and there's going to be 10, 20-storey development behind it with just narrow facades, a couple of bricks, like what is proposed for this site. Consultants come up and say this is a reasonable development because we're keeping the facade with a 16-storey tower behind it. I kind of lose the plot trying to understand this kind of reasoning. So there are very clear ways that the future can be protected. The future problems can be avoided through measures like height controls. Fundamentally, on the solutions, structure plans, a lot of you will know what they are. They were plans, they were intended to be master plans in a sense for either precincts or particular sites like this, to allow a council to control the development, height and type, beyond what the zone said. So even if the mixed-use zone had no height control, the structure plan could try to include a height control. The problem is the government will not allow, this government as well, will not allow mandatory height controls and mandatory rules in structure plans. Structure plans also cost a fortune. Councils spend just enormous amounts of money. They take years to get up. So structure plan is not a solution for this site or all the other sites that you're going to be bombarded with in the next 3 to 5 years. There is a simple solution to this: change the commercial one and mixed-use zones. I've written out a clause, we put it to the government, this is how you do it. The government knows this. It's a simple technique. It's not rocket science. Every single planner knows how to solve this problem. Finally, I think this kind of site is iconic in the sense that it's got important heritage values. It's got hugely important amenity values and great, and it's going to act as a precedent. And all the issues that are being fought out on this site are so generic. I mean, they're so similar to so many other sites and what is going to happen. We have to figure out ways in Melbourne to gain increased density on sites like this. Right? I don't think many people would oppose some kind of redevelopment of this site if it's not working in its original form. There are sites like this that are very suitable for redevelopment. I support them. We did a big study last year which identified them, including this site. But we came up with draft rules for the government to show how you could get quite dense development, but which solved a whole series of other problems. Instead of building 1 and 2 storey, primarily 1 and 2 storey apartments that are going to be rented and mainly owned by investors, locking people out who need housing, you can build a different type of housing on these sites, right? The way Europe does. You can have a mix of house types, a mix of densities that are going to cater for our children who are coming out of our suburbs. 200,000 new households will be formed from the middle and inner ring suburbs by 2020. So we really need redevelopment, but not of this kind, which is building the wrong type of development at the wrong height, catering not for the needs that our children and other new households that are forming in this area need. So we've got to figure this out better. Governments really know the solution, and there is no solution, government stepping back from the problem and letting developers try to work out what they want to do. That is just going to create more and more problems of affordability, inappropriate density, and fundamentally dysfunction in areas like this. So hopefully this site can be solved. Hopefully your delegation will get a positive response. But I think even more important than, or at least supplementing this, there needs to be a solution to the broader issue that is affecting all the inner areas and many of the middle-ring areas to fix up the planning system. And that's going to need more and more pressure over the next couple of years. Thank you.